Welcome to the show, David Batchelor. It's lovely to have you.
Thanks very much, Amanda. It's great to be here. Well, not here actually. I'm still sitting in my isolating room in the UK.
In the UK.
But we're still in the throes of the pandemic, and so I'm enjoying being at home all the time, sort of.
But you're about to be opened up, apparently. So that'll be exciting.
Yeah, that'll be good.
Back to normal. Now, I think I met you in Florida a few years ago at an MDRT conference. I think you were speaking there, and with mutual friends, all went out to dinner and got chatting, probably over a really good piece of steak or sushi, I can't remember which, about our businesses, and found out that, like most people, you accidentally became a financial advisor, but started out your career as a drummer. So how did that happen?
Yeah, I don't think any of us come into this by design, do we? Most of us kind of just happen into this business by accident. And when I left school, I was a professional musician, a percussionist, mostly doing drums, but I did lots of stuff, and I did most of my work in the West End, where I'd go in because I'm still a perfect sight reader, so I could go into a show and I'd put down the music and I just play the music. It's like a machine, it just all works. So when someone wants to have a week off of Phantom of the Opera or Starlight Express, I'd go in and I'd do that. And that was my intention until I decided I wanted to buy a house. And what you could probably appreciate is that drummers can't get mortgages. Nobody wants to lend money to a drummer. So the way over this was, I know what I'll do. I'm just going to get a job at a bank. In those days, so this was late 80s, if you could walk and chew gum, you could get a job at a bank. Anyone could do that. So I thought, I could do that. I'll do that for, perhaps during the day, because the music was virtually all in the evening. There's not much day work unless you did some session work. I wasn't doing much of that. So it was all evening work. So I could do that during the day. And then once I got the mortgage, then perhaps drop and go back to full-time drumming. And so I got this job with a bank, and it turned out I was actually by accident quite good at it, which then meant I was poached by another bank, which ultimately became Citibank. And from there, things rolled on, and the music work kind of went down, and the financial work kind of went up until my nan passed away. So back in 1991, my nan passed away, and she left me £9,000. And so almost exactly the same time, the company I was working for, which is now Citibank, had averaged out bonuses because I was running a branch and used to get manager's bonus. And then the new CEO thought it would be a very good idea so everyone gets the same bonus regardless of how profitable you are. So I was in the top 3 out of 97. So then my bonus was up there. Somebody moved down to the average of 97. So I was quite fed up with this chap. So in a heat of unprepared action, I told him I'm not going to be around anymore. So I just received this money from my nan. So that's £9,000. And I used that to start the business, which in those days was old-fashioned selling life insurance, like we all did in those days, selling savings plans and life insurance. And that's how I ended up with my own company, just because I was fed up with this guy and I had this £9,000 in the bank. Of course, I don't know, it's like when you started, but you think you know everything until you suddenly start to do it and you suddenly realise you know nothing about running a business.
I think the older I get, the less I realise I know, actually. I was so smart when I was 20.
Yeah, you know everything. You know everything, don't you?
Well, you've got a toddler. I suppose Jack's probably about 4 now. I'm sure he knows everything. So
at 5, yeah, you think he would do, yeah. But,
all over the old man. Now, one of my favourite questions to ask everybody is what influence your family had on your beliefs about money. Now, you've got a really interesting background coming from, sessional work to work in a bank to running your own business. What sort of jobs did your parents have, and did they give you any lessons about money, whether spoken or unspoken?
Yeah, I think there was a lot that came from that, and not by design, I think. My dad owned a building company. It sounds very grand, like a building company. It was him, like 4 or 5 guys, and they'd go and put up extensions and that kind of thing. My dad was a great guy, he was sort of the earth guy. He'd be always the first person to put his hands in his pocket to help somebody. But he wasn't very good with money, and he was made bankrupt twice. And I remember when I was 14 coming home from school, I rode my bike home. I came in up the little drive that we had, and kind of like went into the front door, and there was a knock on the door. And it was bailiffs who'd come to repossess Dad's car, which was I remember because it was this. My dad liked cowboy boots. I don't know why. Like, we lived in South London. We used to wear cowboy boots, which was fine.
Close to Texas.
It was close to Texas. And so he had this big Jeep Cherokee, which you didn't have those in the UK at that time. So it was a big gold thing. And they came and repossessed it. And I remember that at the time and seeing, what was all this about? And fortunately, the house was in Mum's name, so we didn't lose the house, that kind of stuff. But, like everything was lost. And when you see that, it makes you realise that the pain of losing what you've got, and I think it makes you inherently more cautious, and that has affected both the way I think about my business and businesses, and how I think about my own personal money, and how I train clients and how I train my family. In that, actually, you've always got to make sure the downside is protected, because otherwise you get carried over, which is it. And when you see it twice, going through it once was bad enough, but you went through it the second time when I'd left home. So I'd have been about 2021 when he was made bankrupt for the second time. And I remember I said to him, because he couldn't afford a lawyer, so I said, I'll come to bankruptcy court with you. So I went there, and it's pretty much just to stop my dad effing and blinding at the bankruptcy receiver, because my dad would have a very short fuse, and it would only make things worse. So I think, that kind of family background, it did really influence my caution when it comes to my own financial planning, advising clients, and what we do with the business.
And yet your brother became a builder anyway, saw all that.
My brother became a builder and it was equally as unsuccessful as...
I think that's just the highs and lows of the building trade, and it's exactly the same here in Australia. It's never rains but it pours, or, there's absolutely nothing. I mean, at the moment... since the pandemic, we've had an absolute rush on houses, and we can't get timber and steel. So building companies are actually paying people to get out of their contracts. So, it's amazing. There's all the work there, but we can't get the supplies. So
well, that's the same around the world, isn't it? But funny enough, I had our team conference last week, and I gave everybody a copy of the old Clayton book, The Richest Man in Babylon. Which if your listeners haven't read it, then read that book. Because if you just do what that book says, and bear in mind that book's probably 70 years old now. Yeah. My brother and my dad wouldn't have had an issue. It's that old simple thing. Learn to live on 70% of your income and save the other 30%. Whereas my dad learned to live on 110% of his income. So it was always...
You said your mum was a bit more frugal. She was the one who'd sort of stashed the money to cover taxes and make ends meet. So how did it all impact her?
Well, you're right. My mum and dad come from a very working class background, and you might remember people talking about having tins, and my mum would literally have tins because dad would deal with lots of cash, and she would just take the cash and stuff it in the tins. So there was enough money to pay for that mortgage, or to pay for this, or to pay for that. And I think without her having that bit of common sense behind them, we wouldn't have had anything really. So, Mum has always been like that. My dad's passed away last year now, and so I've become even closer to my mum. And even now she's telling me the stories about, Dad never knew that I took this money. I just take the money out of his jeans and hide it over here. So
Oh, cute. So you first learned about money by working at the bank, but you also told me a really cool story about a guy at school that you got a really good lesson from who wanted to do some fundraising. Can you share that?
So when I was 14, I was at school and we had a new teacher come in. Mr. Baldwin, he was. Graham Baldwin, his full name. And Mr. Baldwin had taught at a private school. And he'd watched a television program on the BBC where they sent 30 or 40 guys from a state school into a private school to see if it would change them, which it did, and they did really successfully. And the BBC said to the teacher, well, would you come and teach at the state school, and we'll see if you can have an impact? And this guy said, no, I'm not going to do that. That's crazy. And Mr. Baldwin was watching this, and he thought, I could do that. And so he literally left the school where he was in Oxford and came to our school. It's a state school. And his mindset was totally different to any teacher I've ever come across. An example of this is that we've been forever trying to raise money to put a roof over the swimming pool. There was an old swimming pool in the school grounds, which no one used. It was an outdoor thing. and forever they wanted to have a roof over the school, over the swimming pool. And there was never enough money for it. And every year there was this fundraising thing. You had the temperature chart, and it was going up and never going up. And my mum went to a PTA, Parent Teacher Association meeting, where Mr. Baldwin was there for the first time, and they were talking about this. And Mr. Baldwin said, well, why don't we just borrow the money and build it? And everyone said, oh, you can't borrow money, you can't, what are you doing? We don't do that sort of thing. He said, well, of course we can. Anyway, about a week later, he came back, he said to school, there you go, there's the money. It was, I don't know, something like £15,000. And he maxed out one of his credit cards and taken out a personal loan and said, there you go, there's the money. He said, you got 3 years to pay me back. And everyone was like, what? He said, oh, now you've got to do it, haven't you? And of course the roof went up and it was fantastic. Of course we paid him back. But what it showed was, the importance of taking action, taking responsibility. He took responsibility to solve the thing rather than everybody else would just kick the can down the road. And I learned a great many things from Mr. Baldwin. And interestingly, maybe 4 years ago, I was talking about this and a couple of other stories about Mr. Baldwin to one of my pals over Christmas. And he said to me, my friend, he said, did you ever tell Mr. Baldwin about the impact that he had on you? And I said, well, I don't think so. He said, well, you probably should. And my wife then went out, and she, we were there drinking Jack Daniels into the evening, and she came back in with the iPad. She said, is this him? She held up the iPad. I went, oh, that's him. She'd found him at a school in Canada where he was teaching. So I emailed him, are you the Mr. Baldwin who? He came back, yes, I am. But you rich? Because he knew I played drums, and that was almost like a code sort of thing. Yeah. And so I arranged when I was where was I? I was at MDRT. Following MDRT, I flew to Boston where he was speaking at a conference, and I met him in the airport. We had 3 hours together in the airport, and I filmed him and videoed him, the answer to his questions, and then I made that into a video, about a 18-minute video, which I then showed at a client conference. So I showed the interview with him, because we do client conferences once a year, so we have about 400 or 500 people in the room, and I showed this, and people were in tears when they saw this kind of thing. And I finished it with who in your life has changed your life, and who should you contact and thank now? And I've had so many notes and so many emails from clients saying, thank you very much for that. I contacted my teacher, I contacted my friend, I contacted whoever, and just to say thank you. And it just goes to show the range of influence that we can have in our fantastic business of financial advice. It's not just about the money, it's about those other things which come from it, without planning, really. Yeah,
beautiful story. And making such an impact to their lives, knowing that they did leave footprints, and that, they did leave an impact on other people's lives and hearts. So that's a great story. Actually, if you're happy to share that Vimeo link, I'd be happy to put that in the show notes. So if people want to watch that, they can find the story.
Yeah. See Mr.
That'd be great.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Now, you said things weren't easy when you first started in business. So I love getting into the nitty gritty. Life's successful now. You've got a couple of businesses. Life's good. You're not just drumming anymore. What sort of financial setbacks have you had to overcome?
Well, when Nan left me that £9,000, I thought, that day I was probably only £1,000 a month. So that was 9 months of money. I thought, well, this will easily carry me. And the company that I started my own agency. They promised me a load of client leads, and when I got there, they gave me the Yellow Pages and said, "They are your leads." Really? Is that mis-selling or what? The Yellow Pages, and they said, "Right, start phoning people, making appointments." I remember that first day because I contacted 66 people, made more phone calls than that. I contacted 66 and made 3 appointments. So I figured a 1 in 22 closing rate was okay until 2 cancelled.
1 in 66. You're on getting.
Cold calling is not it. And so really, I had no idea what I was doing. So things just got worse, and I spent that £9,000 went negative, and it got to the point where I was out doing appointments all day. I'd come home, so I had 2 daughters, so I'd have tea with them, and I'd go out and do the evening appointments. I'd get home about 10:30. And then myself and my wife would sit there and pack Valentine's cards to make extra money to pay for the nappies because we literally had no money at all. And it's, I think, going through that kind of pain has added to my caution even more. And as my businesses have got stronger, I've realised the importance of having strong reserves within the company and having strong personal reserves so you can protect yourself against that kind of thing. Because it was very, 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 very painful time, as it was in 2008. Now, I'm not talking about the global crisis. I'm talking about in the UK, they changed the law on a bit of tax legislation. So in 2008, they changed the law, which meant that we were selling a product which reduced inheritance tax by half. And we'd just done a big client seminar to attract clients. And we'd had about 30 people say, yes, they want to come for meetings, that kind of stuff. We were driving back in the car and we had the radio on. The Chancellor's had the budget going, which is the annual thing where the Chancellor changed all the tax rules, what have you.
Yep.
And he said, we're going to change this rule so that people don't pay this amount of inheritance tax. Instantly, that one product, which is our biggest selling product, disappeared overnight. It's almost like, the government saying, we're going to give everybody a brand new car when you can drive free. And it's like, that's what it was. And I still remember the figures. We had £248,000 of fees that people had paid in advance because we took fees up front in advance. To put these things in place, because we had probably about 50 odd, plans in place which we were going through, and people had paid for this thing. All of a sudden, they didn't need it. It was given to them free, so we effectively had to give back £250,000 to clients.
Oh, ouch!
Yeah, you're not expecting that, and then of course all the prospects we had suddenly disappeared because our biggest selling product suddenly became banned. It wasn't like we had any. It wasn't like we had any preparation for this. It just happened on that one day.
Yep, out of your control.
Experience. You've got to have money in the bank. If you don't have money in the bank, then whether you're an individual or a business, you're in a risky position to be.
So aside from the book, The Richest Man in Babylon, which you're actually not the first person to mention, what other top tips have you been given, or the best financial advice that you've come across or that people have shared with you?
Well, interestingly, apart from that technical stuff which we do, when we talk about just good financial principles, pretty much everyone says the same thing. Whether it's T. Harv Eker is it called A Millionaire's Mind? I forget the name of his book. T. Harv Eker, I'm pretty certain it's A Millionaire's Mind. Or you talk about Jim Rohn, The Art of Exceptional Living, or even Magic of Thinking Big by David Schwartz. All of them say the same thing, which is pay yourself first. Now, when you get some money, learn to live on, well, some say 80%, some say 60%, but say learn to live on that part so that you can take the rest, the other 30%, and do something important and interesting with it. And I taught this to my daughters, and I teach this to the clients, and it's over and over again. You've got to learn to live on less than you earn. So yeah, you've got to learn to live on less than you earn, which is fairly obvious, but of course most people don't do that, especially millennials. And I don't want to have that whole millennial kind of like debate.
Live on 120% of my income.
yeah, exactly. Because of course it's really important. Yes, you must have Sky TV. What is it? You must have the latest iPhone. You must have a dishwasher. You must have all these things. Otherwise you haven't got a reasonable life. Whereas, what Jim Rohn talks about is no, actually, if you're living on 70%. You live on 70%. If that means you can't have a new iPhone, it means you can't have a brand new car, you've got another one. If that means you need to have a slightly smaller house, that's what you should do. Because if you do that in the short term, the long term will be in a much better position.
I remember one person telling me, they couldn't afford a dining table for years, so they had off the ironing board. And we actually had an awful dark green plastic outdoor picnic table that we dragged in. So I went through I couldn't afford a dining table for a while till a mate of mine who was an upholsterer got paid in furniture from a motel and took pity on us and gave us a dining table. But it was just that, I'd stopped work. I'd had 2 small children by the time I was 25, and it was just that really hard lesson to live within your means. And, you just have to do what you have to do. So that's obviously the big lesson you've taught your girls, that they're older, like later 20s, early 30s now, your girls, or? Yeah,
I've got 2 daughters from my first marriage. Emily's 31 and Hope's 29. And interestingly, I was talking to Hope about this fairly recently. She came over, and we were talking about one of her best friends, Ellie. And when they were probably early 20s, late 1920s, something like that, we were going to a nightclub. And so she'd asked me if I could give them a lift. So I said, I can't, I'll give you a lift to this nightclub. And so I took her and Ellie, and they went to this nightclub. And then they went to the service till to get some money out of the service till for the night. And Hope put a card in, pressed the buttons, and it came up saying, do you want a balance? And Hope clicked yes. And it came up with something like £2,500. And Ellie, standing next to her, said, my God, Hope, we've got so much money in your account, let's take some money out. And Hope's going, no, you don't understand. She said, that's I can only take money out of my play account. The rest of it is my financial independence account. I can't touch that. And then he looked at her as if though she was an alien, saying, you took about your financial independence account, you know. But now, you know, Hope's 29, and she's, you know, she doesn't have a better paying job than all her friends. They're all about the same. But you see, she's significantly more wealthy than all of her friends. You know, the property that she owns, and most of her friends don't own any property because they didn't have any deposit to put down, but she did because she saved. So, you know, I know she's got her in her spreadsheet to be financially independent by the time she's 40, which is defined as having £1 million. You know, that's how she defines it. And she's got this house that's better than everybody else. And I say, yes, she works hard, and, you know, she probably puts in more than most people, but still, she has her rules. You know, that 30% goes for long-term savings, goes into the financial independence pot. And, you know, I have my play pot, which I can blow it on whatever. So in 10% money, she can blow. And she's very disciplined with that. And that, you know, that comes from that simple process of having these pots, which again is just very simple financial planning, which I think as financial advisors, we can get too wrapped up in the technicalities of tax planning and asset allocation, all that kind of stuff, all of which is important. But, you know, when we speak to a client, and with a company name like Wilson Trust, obviously we do a lot of estate planning. Most of our clients are in their 60s and 70s. But what we always say is that, you know, if you're going to pass the money down to your children who are probably in their 40s, that kind of thing, and to your grandchildren that might be in their 20s, how do you know they're going to use the money properly? So if we're going to set this estate plan, what we must be doing at the same time is we've got to educate your children and grandchildren. We've got to teach them how to inherit. And so every year we run a next generation workshop for the clients of for the children of our clients. We usually get, you know, 100, 120 people there. It's on a Saturday morning. And we literally spend the morning teaching them how to inherit, about what you do when you receive large sums of money. Because if you've not earned the money, you treat it very differently than if you've earned it. And all our clients will die with too much money because they don't spend it, and they've spent all their time earning it. But, you know, it's that old adage, isn't it? If people win the lottery, then they're poor again in 3 years.
Or worse off, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I had this situation, this guy, mum and dad had died, and I had a probate meeting, so post-death meeting, and it was with the two sisters. I was in the room, the two sisters were on my right, the brother was on my left, and the uncle, who was executor, was at the far end of the table. And the lawyer was in doing some bits and pieces, and he'd gone out to get some paper printed or whatever. And I said to the guy, I said, so what are you going to spend your money on? And he was going to inherit something like about £300,000 from this. And this was only maybe just before lockdown, 18 months ago. And so I said, what are you going to spend your money on? He said, I'm going to buy a car. I said, oh, right. What are you going to buy? He said, well, I was thinking like a DB7, DB8, something like that.
I'm with him on that.
They never go and buy a cheap Fiesta or whatever it is. They always go and buy this car. And I said, how much do you think that's going to cost? He said, I'm not going to buy a new one. So probably about 70,000, something like that. I said, £70,000. He said, yeah. I said, you're because his dad was a plumber, owned a little plumbing company. Well, not a massive guy, him and two other fellas. And I said, how long do you think it took your dad to save £70,000? He went, I don't know. I said, you've got a value there, haven't you, how much your dad owned? If you were saving money out of that, how long would that have taken? He went, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years, something like that. I said, well, yeah, probably about right. Do you really think your dad would have saved half for 5 years for you to blow it on a car? And the two girls went, see, told you. People don't know how to inherit, you know, and I think as financial advisor, I think that's part of our job, especially if we set up life insurance and we do all that kind of stuff. It's no good just working with the client. We've got to work with the beneficiaries, teach them how to inherit as well. And that's important for us to know first before we can pass it on.
Absolutely. No, it's a great idea, the intergenerational planning, especially, as the baby boomers age and pass, they're talking about, this will be the greatest intergenerational transfer of wealth, like in the history, of mankind. So it's a big thing we're talking about here. And I'm also really impressed with your daughter that she actually listened to you. I don't know how many dads are going to listen to this and go, my daughter wouldn't do anything I told her to do.
The other one not so much.
It's obviously worked out for her, so you can say I told you so at some stage. So obviously it's important. You talked about the pots or the tins for your mum. Other people use the envelopes or, sub-accounts, whatever. That works. So is it important to you, and do you still run a personal budget?
I do, probably not so much. I'm fortunate enough to be financially independent now, so it's not so much a big thing. But yes, when money comes in, I still have the pot. So one of the biggest things for me is I take some proportion that goes into the charity pot, because probably I, like you, end up getting no end of emails and phone calls saying, would you sponsor me for this? Would you sponsor me for that? That kind of stuff. So I like to make sure I've got that pot. So when I want to contribute, I can contribute significantly. So, I still have that pot there. We still operate the play pots. So when money comes in, myself, my wife, we have our own play pots now. Money goes into play pots. That's money that you can blow and do whatever you want without feeling guilty, that kind of thing. And we still have the financial independence pot, which fortunately is big enough for us to live off now. We're quite fortunate, but there's no reason why we shouldn't still contribute that. So we do, but it's slightly changed because once you become financially independent, you have to think about it in a slightly different way. And it is thinking about, well, how are you going to use it if you don't spend it all? And part of that is, who do you help and why? And what is your definition of charitable help? And it doesn't just mean giving money to charities. It means who in your family would you help? How would you help? And what would be the process of doing that kind of thing? So, yes, I do, but it has just changed slightly once you get to the point where you are financially independent.
You can buy Jack and Aston Martin there.
Yeah.
Well, they are saying that maybe kids these days won't even drive by the time, next 10, 15 years. So we'll see if that plays out or not.
I said to my wife, as we're coming to the summer here, I said, I want to go and buy a Jeep. No, a good old-fashioned Wrangler with no roof, no doors, and I would be able to take Jack out camping. That's what we're going to do. And in our financial services practice, we built a massive thing based on investing only for ways to save the planet rather than destroy it. It's called the Attenborough Scale. It's all based around the work of David Attenborough, which I'm sure you would have heard of.
Yes.
And in his last book, he talks about the 5 ways we need to save the planet. We actually have an investment strategy revolving around those 5 ways because we want people to, if they want to, be involved in that and invest in such a way that saves the planet rather than destroys it. And so in doing that, my wife said, you cannot go and buy a 4-litre Jeep and drive that around if you're trying to encourage people to invest in ways to save the planet. So,
walk the talk, David.
Yeah, you got to. Yeah, so I have a Tesla, which of course everyone has a Tesla because it's the thing to have, isn't it? But we've made a rule that we're not allowed to buy any other cars unless they're fully electric, not hybrid, fully electric. So we're desperately waiting for a fully electric 4-wheel drive something or other to come out so I can drive this big thing around and go camping with Jack.
Do you find there's much more interest from your clients now in socially responsible investments and those that support the sustainable development goals of the world?
Yeah, there is. And of course, you see that coming in with the millennials. But what I see very clearly is that people go on the journey. When they have no money, they want to do that. When they get money, they care less about it and care more about the money. And that is a real journey that people go on. We did a survey of our clients, not this January beforehand, just before we went into lockdown, asking them would they like to be able to have the option to invest in investments which promoted saving the planet. That sort of wording we use, something like that. And something like 9% came back and said yes. And then then we said, what conditions? And pretty much everyone said, I'll do it as long as it doesn't cost me anything. So they weren't prepared to give up returns or to pay more money to do it. So, of course, it's easy to say yes if it's not going to cost you anything, isn't it? So the real question is how much you're prepared to pay, whether by different return. None of us really know whether those investments do better or worse because we don't really have any ballpark on that yet. But certainly, where we've built these portfolios, they are more expensive because we're buying more esoteric investments which are tougher to get into. Perhaps there's less liquidity, so you give up some liquidity for it. So the question is, are people prepared to give up other things such as liquidity? Are they prepared to pay more to invest in those kind of investments? And as I say, people start off by saying yes when they don't have much money, but when they have money, they think about it very differently. So we're having to work really hard to try and build this so that people can make an informed decision, but without paying an arm and leg for it. And unfortunately, until we're probably 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the road with this, where we can show some performance data, it's really difficult to say whether these things are going to do better or worse. And that's the first thing they say is, well, these investments do better for me. Will they be worse? I don't know. Because guess what? Tesla wasn't around in 10 years ago. So we can't tell you what it would have done. And, the other big one is like, well, why don't we invest in Netflix? That's not going to, destroy the world. Well, doesn't necessarily help it either, does it? What are we trying to do, And so this is why it's so difficult, this socially responsible, this sustainable thing, which is why we kind of aired on using the principles that David Attenborough came out and created this thing called the Attenborough Scale. So you can either invest with that, make David Attenborough 100% happy or very sad. Where do you want to be? And if you're going to ask me what return they're going to get, I can't tell you. There is no history on that yet. And do you what's the real reason you're doing it? Are you doing it because you want greater returns, or are you doing it because you want to be seen to be doing the right thing? The other thing I see is
the feel-good factor.
Yeah, you see, older people tend to do one of two things. Either they say, not interested, I want my X%, if I'm not going to do that.
I want my BHP coal mine.
Yeah, they say, well, I'll have a little bit. That way I can tell my grandchildren I'm doing some of it, and I'm doing my bit. I'm doing my bit because I've got a third in socially responsible, ethical, whatever terms you want to use, in it. So they're doing it because how they want to appear to somebody else. So it really is quite interesting. As we've really got deeply into it, we've built some software which does it, and we're promoting it to other advisors in the UK, so other IFAs in the UK can use what we've built, because it's really hard to build. It's interesting to see how clients are reacting to it. Because everyone says they want it, and it's like everyone says they want an electric car, until it's like, yeah, but it only goes so far. Oh, yeah, but once a year I drive 200 miles in one go, and I need to be able to do that. It's that kind of thing that you get.
Yeah, absolutely. One final...
You always go...
No, that's all right. One final question for you. You fell into financial planning from drumming. I don't think I've seen a bigger, wider career stretch than that one. What benefits do you think clients get from working with financial professionals? You've been doing this a while. You've got a few businesses. Why do people keep coming back to you, and what's the value?
The real value is the confidence that it gives them. It's not about do they get better returns, and of course we like to think that, and usually we do, but that's not what it's about. It's about that somebody else is looking out for them and giving the confidence that everything is happening at the right time and in the right place. Because there's a great fear of this, FOMO, fear of missing out, that clients have. Whereas if they know there's somebody else behind them, that's what helps. And predominantly, certainly in the way in which we work, where it really shows up is when somebody dies. As a financial advisor, yes, you can make them a couple of extra %. You can reduce their charges. You can save them some tax. But, you've got a husband and wife, and one day he doesn't wake up. What you do with a wife then, that shows the value of what we do. I had 3 weeks ago, I was on holiday, this camping trip we had, and
but not in the Jeep.
And it wasn't in the Jeep. No, it wasn't. No. And the rules are when I'm on a free day, the staff can't contact me unless there's a death. That's the only reason. That's the only reason they're allowed to contact me on a free day. Dan Sullivan's definition of free day. And I've got this thing coming through with that. This client, Peter, who I'd spoken to 2 days prior, had died. I was walking along the road and a car was going past, hit a horse box, and a horse box hit him, and He was killed outright.
Gosh.
And I got this message. And so the first thing I did was to phone his daughter. Now, she'd phoned into the office to say this happened, but I phoned her. This was late on a Friday night when I got home. And the first thing I would say is, like, actually, the first thing to understand is do not do anything. Don't try and fix anything. Don't try and do anything. Don't do anything. Spend the weekend with your mum. Just look after your mum. Nancy, who's the widow. And then I'll talk to you first thing on Monday. Just you, and then we'll bring your mum in, then we'll bring your sister in, because Katie was the one who's kind of took control. And the text, I almost cried when I saw the text. Oh, thank you so much for being there. I can't believe you contacted me even though you're on holiday. You know, Dad always said that you're the first person to call, and he really meant it. And so then I had what was a Zoom call with Katie, and then her mum came in, and then Lizzie, her sister, came in. And it was all about, don't worry, everything is in hand. Do not do anything. Sort out the funeral, look after each other, don't do anything else, sort out the funeral, that's it. But do nothing until you get past the funeral. And just, it's one thing to say to Nancy, because we have a lot of those calls, it's about knowing how to deal with them, and the best way to deal with it is humour, I've always found. And so I said to Nancy, of course, what you've got to remember is that Peter was one of the biggest pain in the asses of a client I'd ever had. And of course they all are. But that,
yeah.
I said, Katie, your dad was, he would never stop. I said, but fortunately, there's one thing that he did, which I stopped him doing, and you might remember this, Nancy, and that was last time I saw him, which was like a year ago before that pandemic. He had this life insurance running for £1 million, and he was saying, this is costing me £17,000 a year, David. I should just knock this on there. We don't really need it doing. I said, you know what, Peter? Guess what? Don't tempt fate. Keep it going, right? Because I said, you're getting on a bit now. You're 62, something like that. I said, and it's done 17,000 is dirt cheap for £1 million worth of life insurance. And, if you can sit now, all those payments you made being wasted. He went, well, all right then. And I said, do you remember that conversation, Nancy? She said, oh, gosh, I do. I said, and we just checked. Peter did make the payments. So, and I know you're worried about things, but, within a couple of weeks, I'm going to come over and give you a cheque for £1 million, and you never have to worry about money, right? It's not something you have to worry about. So you can still go to Waitrose. So, yes, go to Waitrose this afternoon, buy lots of wine, all get drunk, and stay for the weekend.
Celebrate. Thanks, Peter.
And of course that made it's one of those things that was funny as well as put their mind at rest, but also that shows the value of what we do, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that is priceless. You can't put a value on, well, I paid you, how many thousands in fees or an insurance premium that I thought was ridiculous. The fact that he knew that if something happened, his wife and kids would be sitting there going, David said we can go and order a magnum of champagne.
Not celebrate his death, but
well, almost to thank him for celebrate his life, but also the appreciation that he did provide for those he'd left behind, and that's a gift.
Yeah,
that's a real gift. Oh, on that note, thank you so much for joining me today, David. Really appreciated your insights as the only drumming financial advisor that I do know. I was a percussionist in high school. I don't know if that counts. More on the xylophone and the maracas, I think. So anyway, thank you so much again. It's been a delight to have you on.
Lovely. Thank you very much, man. It was great to be here. Thank you.